It was 8:46 a.m. on September 11, 2001, when Rick Rescorla heard the explosion that would change everything. He was on the 44th floor of the South Tower of the World Trade Center, serving as Vice President of Security for Morgan Stanley. Through his office window, he could see smoke pouring from the North Tower across the plaza. Most people in his building assumed it was an accident, a terrible tragedy, but not their problem. They were safe. The Port Authority announcement confirmed it. Remain at your desks, do not evacuate. But Rick Rescorla didn't listen to the Port Authority. He had been waiting for this day for years. Rick grabbed his bullhorn, his cell phone, and his red bandana. At 62 years old, with a bad knee and a lifetime of war behind him, he moved with the purpose of a man half his age. He started walking through Morgan Stanley's offices, 19 floors of them, shouting orders that would save 2,700 lives. "Everybody out! Now! Leave everything! Get to the stairs!" Employees looked at him confused. The official announcement said to stay. Rick didn't care. "I've been preparing you for this for years. Trust me. Move." And they moved. Because Rick Rescorla had earned their trust through 2 decades of relentless preparation for a day he prayed would never come, but knew eventually would. This is the true story of Rick Rescorla, the British-born Vietnam War hero who became the greatest security officer in American corporate history, a man who predicted the 9/11 attacks years before they happened. A man who designed and drilled evacuation procedures that his colleagues thought were paranoid. A man who, on the worst day in New York City history, refused to leave the South Tower until every single person under his protection was safe. And a man who sang Cornish songs to calm, terrified employees as he led them down stairwells while the building burned around them. Rick Rescorla saved more lives that day than any single person, and he died doing it. Today, I'm going to tell you exactly who Rick Rescorla was, how a soldier from Cornwall became a Wall Street security chief, why he knew the World Trade Center would be attacked, what he did in those final minutes, and how his legacy still saves lives today. Because Rick's story isn't just about one man's heroism on one terrible day. It's about preparation, leadership, courage, and the kind of man who looks at danger and walks toward it while everyone else runs away. It's about someone the world tried to ignore, tried to dismiss as paranoid, tried to retire, until the moment came when his paranoia was vindicated, his training proved invaluable, and his courage became legendary. Rick Rescorla was born in Cornwall, England, in 1939. He grew up in a working-class family during World War II, watching soldiers march through his town, hearing stories of heroism and sacrifice. From childhood, Rick was obsessed with military history and adventure. He read everything he could about warriors, battles, and acts of courage. His friends played soccer. Rick studied tactics. At 19, he enlisted in the British Army and was deployed to Cyprus during the emergency there in the late 1950s. He learned how to fight, how to lead, how to stay calm when everything around him was chaos. And he learned something else. He was built for it. While other men froze or panicked, Rick's mind became sharper. His instincts took over. He was one of those rare people who thrive in crisis. After his service in Cyprus, Rick moved to northern Rhodesia in Africa, where he joined the Northern Rhodesia Police as an intelligence officer. It was 1963, the height of decolonization conflicts across Africa. Rick found himself in the middle of tribal violence, political upheaval, and guerrilla warfare. He trained local forces, he gathered intelligence, he survived ambushes, and he developed a reputation. Rescorla was the guy you wanted on your team when things went bad. Calm, strategic, fearless, but Rick wasn't satisfied. He wanted to fight in the biggest conflict of his generation. So in 1963, at age 24, Rick Rescorla did something almost unheard of. He moved to America and enlisted in the U.S. Army to fight in Vietnam. Rick became a platoon leader in the 7th Cavalry Regiment, the same unit that fought at the Battle of Little Bighorn nearly a century earlier. He arrived in Vietnam in 1965, just as American involvement was escalating. Rick was assigned to the Ia Drang Valley, and in November 1965, he participated in one of the most brutal battles of the Vietnam War. The Battle of Ia Drang was the first major engagement between U.S. forces and North Vietnamese regulars. It was savage, close-quarters jungle fighting. Rick's platoon was surrounded, outnumbered, and under constant fire for days. Men were dying around him. Ammunition was running low. Helicopters couldn't land because of enemy fire. And Rick Rescorla kept his men alive. He moved through the chaos, organizing defensive positions, directing fire, carrying wounded soldiers to cover, and singing. Yes, singing. Under fire, Rick would sing Cornish folk songs and military ballads to keep morale up, to remind his men they were still alive, still fighting, still together. One soldier who served under him later said, "When you heard Rescorla singing, you knew everything was going to be okay, even when it wasn't." Rick survived Ia Drang. Many didn't. He was photographed during the battle, a haunting image that would later appear in the book We Were Soldiers Once and Young, and the movie based on it. The photo shows Rick, rifle in hand, exhausted but alert, covered in dust and blood, eyes scanning for the next threat. That's who Rick Rescorla was at 26. He completed his tour in Vietnam and returned to America in 1967. He could have stayed in the military. He was offered positions, promotions, but Rick had seen enough war. He wanted to build a different kind of life. He went to college on the GI Bill, earned degrees in criminal justice and English literature, and started teaching. But teaching wasn't enough. Rick missed the structure, the mission, the clarity of purpose that came with protecting people. So in 1985, at age 46, he took a job as Director of Security for Dean Witter, which would soon merge with Morgan Stanley. It seemed like a boring corporate job, a retirement gig, but Rick Rescorla didn't do boring. From day one, Rick approached corporate security the way he approached combat. Prepare for the worst. Train relentlessly, and never assume you're safe just because things seem calm. Morgan Stanley occupied 22 floors across both towers of the World Trade Center, with their main offices in the South Tower. Rick walked every inch of those floors. He studied the building's layout, the stairwells, the exits, the weak points. And he didn't like what he saw. The World Trade Center was a security nightmare. Limited exits, narrow stairwells, tens of thousands of people packed into two massive targets in the heart of Manhattan. Rick knew that if something bad happened, evacuation would be chaos. In 1990, Rick met a security consultant named Daniel J. Hill. Hill was an expert in terrorism and counterterrorism. Rick asked him to do a vulnerability assessment of the World Trade Center. Hill's report was terrifying. He identified multiple ways the towers could be attacked: truck bombs in the basement, hijacked planes, chemical attacks. He specifically warned that a truck bomb in the underground parking garage could bring down one or both towers. Rick read the report and immediately began pushing for increased security measures. He wanted vehicle barriers. He wanted restricted access to the parking garage. He wanted evacuation plans. Morgan Stanley management listened politely and did very little. The Port Authority, which owned the building, did even less. Rick was told he was being paranoid. On February 26, 1993, Rick Rescorla's paranoia was proven right. A truck bomb exploded in the underground parking garage of the North Tower. The blast killed 6 people, injured over 1,000, and left a crater several stories deep. Smoke filled the towers. The power went out. Emergency lighting failed in many areas. Tens of thousands of people tried to evacuate down dark, crowded stairwells. It took hours. Some people were trapped for the entire day. The evacuation was chaotic and terrifying, and Rick Rescorla watched it all and learned everything he needed to know. When the real attack came, they would need to be ready. After the 1993 bombing, Rick completely redesigned Morgan Stanley's evacuation procedures. He didn't wait for permission from the Port Authority or building management, he just did it. Every 3 months, Rick would order a surprise evacuation drill for all Morgan Stanley employees. No warning, no exceptions. The alarm would sound, and everyone, traders, executives, secretaries, analysts, had to evacuate the building using the stairwells. No elevators, no delays. People hated it. Traders complained they were losing money. Executives complained it disrupted business. Rick didn't care. "You're all going to die if you don't learn how to get out of this building fast," he told them, and he made them practice, again and again and again. Rick walked the stairwells with his employees during drills. He timed them, he identified bottlenecks. He taught people to stay calm, to help each other, to not panic. He installed glow-in-the-dark tape on stairwell railings in case the lights went out. He positioned emergency supplies on multiple floors. He created designated roles: floor wardens, stairwell monitors, people responsible for helping disabled employees. He turned evacuation into a science, and he sang. During drills, Rick would stand in the stairwells with his bullhorn singing "Men of Harlech," a Welsh battle song to keep people moving and calm. Employees thought he was crazy. Some thought he was a relic from another era, a paranoid old soldier who couldn't let go of Vietnam. But Rick didn't care what they thought. He cared that they would survive. By 2001, Rick Rescorla had been running evacuation drills for 8 years. Morgan Stanley employees could evacuate the building in under 30 minutes. An incredible feat for a company occupying 19 floors with 2,700 employees. Rick had also become increasingly convinced that the 1993 bombing was just the beginning. He believed terrorists would try again, and next time they wouldn't use a truck bomb. They would use planes. He told this to anyone who would listen. In 1998, he even predicted the method: hijacked commercial airliners flown into the towers. Security experts dismissed him. The Port Authority told him it was impossible, but Rick had studied terrorism. He knew Al-Qaeda, he knew their capabilities, and he knew the World Trade Center was still a target. On the morning of September 11, 2001, Rick Rescorla arrived at his office on the 44th floor of the South Tower around 7:30 a.m. He was 62 years old. He had recently told his wife, Susan, that he was thinking about retiring. Just a few more months, he said. They would move to Italy. He would finally relax, write his memoirs, enjoy life. But first, just a few more months. At 8:46 a.m., American Airlines Flight 11 crashed into the North Tower between the 93rd and 99th floors. The impact was felt across the plaza in the South Tower. People rushed to windows to see what had happened. Smoke poured from the North Tower. Debris fell. Rick Rescorla immediately grabbed his phone and called his friend Daniel Hill, the security consultant who had warned about plane attacks years earlier. "Danny, they hit us, just like you said they would." Hill asked where Rick was. Rick said he was in the South Tower. Hill told him, "Rick, you've got to get everyone out, now. The second plane is coming." Rick hung up and grabbed his bullhorn. At that moment, the Port Authority announcement came over the building's PA system. "Building 2 is secure. There is no need to evacuate. Please return to your offices." Rick heard that announcement and made a decision that would save 2,700 lives. He ignored it. Rick started on the highest Morgan Stanley floors and worked his way down. He went floor by floor, office by office, shouting orders. "Everybody out! Leave your belongings! Get to the stairwells now!" People argued with him. "The announcement said we're safe." Rick didn't stop. "I don't care what the announcement said. Get out! Now! Move!" His voice carried the authority of a man who had spent decades in combat and decades preparing for this moment. People moved. They trusted him. They had practiced this dozens of times. They knew the routes, they knew the procedures, and they moved. At 9:03 a.m., 17 minutes after the first plane hit, United Airlines Flight 175 crashed into the South Tower between the 77th and 85th floors. The building shook violently. Walls cracked, ceilings collapsed in some areas. Smoke and jet fuel poured down elevator shafts. The lights went out, emergency lighting kicked in, and Rick Rescorla kept moving through the floors, bullhorn in hand, singing Men of Harlech to calm people down, directing them to the stairwells, making sure no one was left behind. Employees later described the scene. Rick, standing in dark, smoke-filled hallways, singing at the top of his lungs, his voice steady and strong, telling people they were going to be fine. They just needed to keep moving, one step at a time, stay together, help each other. One woman said she was paralyzed with fear until she heard Rick singing. It was the most surreal thing. The building was shaking. We thought we were going to die, and there's this old British guy singing like we're on a hiking trip. But it worked. It calmed us down. We kept moving. By 9:30 a.m., Rick had successfully evacuated nearly all 2,700 Morgan Stanley employees from the South Tower. They were outside, blocks away, safe. Rick's assistant, Wesley Mercer, was with him. Wesley asked if they could leave now. Rick said no. He needed to do one more sweep, make sure no one was left behind. Wesley insisted they had done enough. Everyone was out. The building could collapse any minute. Rick shook his head. "You go, Wes. I'm making one more pass." Wesley refused to leave him. 2 other security officers stayed as well. Rick grabbed his phone and called his wife, Susan. "Susan, I need you to know I love you. I've evacuated everyone from our floors. I'm going back up to make sure no one's trapped. I'll be out soon." Susan begged him not to go back. Rick said, "It's what I do, sweetheart. I'll call you as soon as I'm out." That was the last time Susan Rescorla heard her husband's voice. Rick Rescorla, Wesley Mercer, and 2 other security officers went back into the South Tower stairwells, climbing upward through smoke and debris, checking every floor, making sure no one was left behind. At 9:59 a.m., the South Tower collapsed. All 4 men died instantly. Rick Rescorla's body was never found. He is buried somewhere in the rubble of the South Tower, along with 2,649 other victims. But his legacy is very different from most of the people who died that day, because Rick Rescorla didn't just die in the tower. He saved 2,700 people before he did. Of all the companies in the World Trade Center, Morgan Stanley had the lowest percentage of casualties. Out of 2,700 employees, only 13 died, including Rick and his security team. Every other company lost far more. Some lost entire floors. Rick Rescorla's drills, his paranoia, his preparation, his leadership, it all worked exactly as he knew it would. Susan Rescorla later said, "Rick always told me, if something happens, I'll get them out. That's my job. And if I don't make it, I want you to know I died doing what I believed in." And that's exactly what happened. Rick's friends from Vietnam said it was the most Rick Rescorla death imaginable. He didn't die running away. He died running toward danger to save people, just like Ia Drang, just like every battle he ever fought. Rick Rescorla lived his entire life preparing for moments when other people needed someone to step up, and when the biggest moment came, he was exactly where he needed to be. After 9/11, Rick Rescorla became a legend. The media called him the man who predicted 9/11. Books were written about him. Documentaries featured him. His photograph from Vietnam, the one showing him in combat at Ia Drang, was displayed next to his 9/11 story, showing the arc of a warrior's life from jungle combat to corporate security to ultimate sacrifice. In Cornwall, England, his hometown erected a memorial. In New York, Morgan Stanley created the Rick Rescorla Memorial Garden. The U.S. Army posthumously awarded him honors. And 2,700 people, many of whom once complained about his drills, now tell their children and grandchildren, "Rick Rescorla saved my life." One of the most powerful tributes came from Daniel Hill, the security consultant who worked with Rick and who was on the phone with him minutes before the second plane hit. Hill said, "Rick was a warrior. That's not a metaphor. He was literally a warrior who happened to work in an office building. But he never stopped being a soldier. He never stopped preparing for battle. And when the battle came, he was ready. Everyone else was surprised. Rick wasn't. He had been waiting for this fight for years." Rick's drills, the ones everyone complained about, the ones that disrupted business, the ones that seemed paranoid and unnecessary, became the gold standard for corporate emergency preparedness after 9/11. Companies around the world studied what Rick Rescorla did. His methods were adopted by corporations, schools, hospitals, government buildings. His insistence on regular, realistic evacuation drills is now standard practice. His philosophy, prepare for the worst, train relentlessly, never assume you're safe, is now taught in security courses worldwide. Rick Rescorla changed how America thinks about preparedness and security. He did it not by writing reports or giving speeches, but by doing the work, ignoring critics, and proving that preparation saves lives. Morgan Stanley never forgot Rick Rescorla. The company created the Rescorla Award, given annually to employees who demonstrate extraordinary courage and leadership. Every year on September 11th, Morgan Stanley holds a moment of silence for Rick and the 12 other employees who died. And every year, they practice evacuation drills, Rick's drills, to honor his memory and ensure that if disaster ever strikes again, they'll be ready just like he taught them. Susan Rescorla spent years after 9/11 sharing her husband's story. She traveled to schools, corporations, military bases, telling people about Rick, not to glorify war or death, but to teach the lesson Rick lived by. Preparation, leadership, and courage matter. They save lives. One person who takes responsibility, who trains others, who refuses to panic, who walks toward danger instead of away from it, that person can change everything. Susan said, "Rick always told me, all you need is one person who refuses to quit. That person can save everyone else." He was that person, and he proved it. Rick Rescorla's story teaches us something fundamental about heroism. It's not about being fearless. Rick was afraid on 9/11. He knew the building could collapse. He knew he might die, but he went back anyway because that's what he had prepared to do his entire life. Heroism is preparation meeting opportunity. It's training so hard that when the moment comes, you don't have to think, you just act. Rick spent decades preparing for one day. He never wanted that day to come, but when it did, he was ready. And 2,700 people are alive because he refused to be anything less than fully prepared. Today, Rick Rescorla is remembered as one of the greatest heroes of 9/11, not a firefighter or police officer, a 62-year-old corporate security chief with a bad knee and a bullhorn. A man the world tried to ignore, tried to dismiss as paranoid, tried to silence. But when the towers burned, Rick Rescorla became exactly what he had always been. A warrior who protects his people no matter the cost. A leader who doesn't wait for permission to do what's right. And a hero who proves that age, title, and circumstance don't define courage. Action does. Rick once told a colleague, "The only thing necessary for evil to triumph is for good men to do nothing. I'm not doing nothing." On September 11th, 2001, Rick Rescorla did everything, and he saved more lives that day than most of us will touch in a lifetime. That's not just heroism, that's legacy.